everyone. I'm Nick Vinocour, Politico's editor-at-large. Welcome to everybody in the room, and welcome to everybody who's following us online. I'm about to have a discussion with Nadia Calviño, Spain's Vice President and Minister for the Economy and Digital Transformation. And we're having this conversation just a few months before Spain takes over the rotating presidency of the EU. And there's my illustrious guest. Welcome. So we're right in the middle of things. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We're going to be talking about tricky digital files to take on. But before we jump in, a couple of housekeeping rules. You're welcome to ask questions during the session. It can only be done through the Swap Card platform. You can find instructions on our event website. If you're already on the platform, you can chat with other attendees. And if you're in person, you can ask your question by scanning the rotating QR code on the screen. That's probably too advanced for me, but try your luck. Welcome, Nadia Calviño, and thank you very much. You're taking on the rotating presidency of the EU in a couple months. And one of the biggest challenges on your table is going to be the AI Act. And I want to jump in with a general, maybe provocative question for you. What do you say to founders and technologists who say that the EU is rushing to regulate AI and is going to hurt innovation, that there's a rush to regulate things like ChatGPT? What's your response to that?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be with you today talking about an issue that I'm quite passionate about. And I don't get to talk so much about because I always get questions about fiscal rules, economic governance, and financial stability, but very seldom on the second part of the title of my ministry, which is indeed digitalization. And these issues that are coming up now, not only regarding ChatGPT, but also TikTok, are finally attracting a lot of attention by the media and also citizens on artificial intelligence, which has accelerated exponentially in the last years. I think that this is a process that can be and that is a lever for prosperity and growth, productivity, and so it will not be stopped. It cannot be stopped. But now is the time to set the rules so that we ensure that it is also a transformation for the greater good, for the good of our society, so that it is an artificial intelligence that protects our democratic values, our European values, our rights as citizens, private individual rights, but also collective rights, so that we ensure that citizens can trust these new technologies, companies can also trust them, and that we can continue to progress on the technology development without endangering some of the core principles of our democratic societies.
Mm-hmm. Now, Spain's been a bit in the avant-garde about this. You already have a national AI agency. Could you just very briefly tell us what that does and whether you think this is something that should be generalized across the EU, perhaps with an EU AI agency that would look at the technology across the bloc?
Well, indeed, I think that Spain is one of the leading countries in this area, because despite the fact that it is only now that many are waking up to these developments, fortunately, we've been working on them for the past 5 years. We have a national AI strategy, which we're following, which is also a useful roadmap, I think, for the private sector. We are in the process of establishing a national AI supervisory agency. The European Commission has set up the European Algorithmic Transparency Center here in Sevilla, in the JRC Center in Sevilla. We also were, I think, the first to publish and adopt a Charter of Digital Rights. And we have launched, thanks to the European funds coming through the Next Generation EU program, we have launched massive investments which are supporting innovation, R&D, but also the integration of AI into the technological, the industrial and economic value chains in a manner which puts people at the center, a humanistic digitalization, which is our vision. And I think it's very much the European approach to this issue. So Spain is a front runner in many instances. It's also thanks to the fact that we have very strong digital infrastructures. We have broadband, ultra-fast broadband connections, which are more advanced than Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. The sum of the four largest economies in the European continent. We have leading companies, also vibrant startup ecosystems, and building on those trends, we have really taken this very seriously, and we now see the fruits of that investment and effort during the past 5 years.
Now, the pace of innovation in AI is really mind-blowing, and it's caused a delay in our legislative work here in the EU. I'm going to ask a two-part question to you. One is, do you hope to wrap up the AI Act during Spain's presidency of the EU? And secondly, if you could just broadly tell me what the government's approach is in terms of how restrictive we should be on AI. Is this something, are we more towards the letter written by all those people saying that we should really pause development, or do we want to be more circumspect and allow things? What's a good middle ground there?
Well, the Spanish presidency is basically the last complete presidency before the European elections. The Belgian presidency will not be able to, will not be fully operational for the full semester. And so we really need to wrap up all those relevant pieces of legislation because, as I said in my first reply, I think the moment to set up the European framework for these technological developments, I think the time is now. Because as you said, the technological progress is accelerating, it's mind-blowing. And so we better set up a framework now so that we ensure that the model that will develop is fitting our vision of what it would bring to our societies and the welfare of our citizens. Now, as I said a moment ago also, I don't think AI can be stopped. And I really, I would have a lot of questions about the interest and also the views of those that have called for a pause. I don't know how that would be actually implemented. I think this is not a matter of stopping. It's a matter of setting the right legal and institutional framework right now, you know. And to some extent, I would say this is not, the European way is not the best way, but at the end of the day, I think it will be the only way to ensure that AI can progress, can continue to develop and innovate in a manner which is also compatible to the expectations of our citizens. You know, we live in democratic societies, citizens have rights, we have European values, and we need to ensure that those rights are protected. And so I think that two basic principles should be fair competition and confidence, because our data are protected, because biases and discrimination is impeded, and the ethical rules underpinning all these new technologies are aligned with our democratic values. To a certain extent, you know, ethical rules are not do not happen by accident in technological developments. They need to be inserted by design, and I think it is in the interest of the private companies to have a clear framework and to make sure that the design of the algorithms are integrating those ethical principles and values from the start, so that we do not have some unpleasant surprises down the line.
So if the Belgians don't have a complete presidency, do I understand that this file should really be wrapped up under Spain's watch? Mm-hmm.
We'll do our utmost to wrap up all the remaining pieces of legislation. That's AI, Data Act, cyber resilience, and of course, e-identity. These are heavy files. As I said at the beginning, my ministry is also responsible for economic policy. Mm-hmm. So we will also have to bring to a good finishing line and advance as much as possible with all the other files relating to fiscal rules and economic governance and state aid, financial regulation, green finance. You know, there are many value-added and quite complex, by the way, challenging files that come to maturity under our presidency, and we are fully committed to doing our utmost to reach as much agreement as possible and to close as many as possible, of course, by the end of the year.
It's going to be an exciting and busy time. Little bit. We'll come back to some of those nitty-gritty legislative files. Just wanted to ask your view on something. There's an MEP, Dragos Tudorasi, who's leading on the AI Act in Parliament, and he's written a letter calling for a global summit on AI, basically saying, hold on, the progress in this field is so lightning fast. We need to get together our top global leaders, from Ursula von der Leyen to Joe Biden, in a format to talk about some of the really big questions. How do you feel about that call? Should we have that summit?
Well, certainly it would be great if we could have a body or a forum such as the G20 that would provide us with a basis to reach some basic principles at world level. Actually, on our side, the Charter of Digital Rights, for example, is inspiring work in the EU. We're also working very closely with Latin American countries. In the OECD, we have in the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, we also organized gatherings of the different governments to try to start to set up some basic principles that should guide legislation throughout the world. Mm-hmm. And it would be great if we could make progress in parallel, particularly bringing on board the two key jurisdictions in this area, which are probably the US and China. Mm-hmm. But if this doesn't happen, and this unfortunately has been the case in the past regarding data protection, well, Europe has been leading the way with the GDPR, and at the beginning, many said, "Oh, this is never going to work, or this is going to stall innovation." And actually, very soon after the adoption of the regulation on data protection, it has become a world standard. So, as I said, I don't think we have to stop our work in this area. Quite on the contrary, I think that we have to speed up so that we can have the right framework for technology to continue to develop in a safe and fair framework, right. Context.
So it'd be a good idea to put AI on the agenda of the G7 or the G20. Would you support that? Mm-hmm.
Definitely, it is always there in one way or another. There is always some discussion and a paragraph talking about fair distribution, not distribution, fair exchange of data across jurisdictions. But it is true that these four are dealing right now with so many top priority issues that probably they don't have so much time to devote to these. Mm-hmm. But sooner or later, the issue of AI and ensuring that it is developed in a manner which is consistent with our vision for the world and the welfare of our citizens, as I said before, sooner or later, I think this is going to require an international global forum, because Europe is a leading actor. We are a very big economy. We're a powerhouse in the area of trade, and obviously we can lead, but at the end of the day, we need all jurisdictions to follow suit, like in the green transition, if we want to address this global challenge.
Right. Among the files on your desk and things you'll have to wrap up is the Platform Workers Act. And I know that wasn't on your list. It's been a tricky one that has been stalled in the EU process, and yet it's one where Spain has staked out a clear position that gig workers should be requalified as regular workers. I want to ask, do you want to bring this file over the line, and will Spain be able to put its own position aside and conduct this discussion impartially, as it's expected of an EU presidency? Mm.
Well, of course, we have to do that with all files. But actually, I think it is an advantage that in Spain already, a couple of years ago, we adopted legislation which was agreed with social partners. This is important. We agreed this piece of legislation with the trade unions, with the workers' unions, but also with the business representatives. And we adopted a piece of legislation which has enabled what you call the gig economy, platform workers, to continue to work, but in a legal framework which also protects their rights as workers. Many false self-employed workers, fake self-employed workers have been brought to the legal formal economy. And this, I think, has just provided more security and more protection for workers without impeding the development of this new economy.
Is Spain an example for the rest of Europe on platform workers and their legal status?
Well, it would be a bit strange if I say that, but the European Commission, commissioners and vice presidents have signaled Spain as maybe an example or a reference that could be useful for the discussion at European level, indeed.
And that's also one of the files that you hope to wrap up before the end of your presidency.
Yes, I mean, as I said, the list of points, I only flagged a number of them. Every time I meet with any of the colleagues coming from the European Commission, and all the commissioners are coming around to Madrid these days, and we're also traveling to Brussels. Every time I have one of these meetings, my list is only extended, So homework is going to be quite daunting. But we were really very committed to making the most of our presidency, because I really think that a number of these files can set Europe on the right foot for the coming decade. And so we should not lose, there's no time to lose, to try to reach an agreement and make as much progress as possible on all these files.
Indeed, and I see the counter here is ticking down. I don't have much time left either, but I wanted to ask you on another one that sometimes sort of gets people going is digital identity. Could you tell us very briefly what this is? Are we going to establish a digital identity card for all European citizens? Isn't there a risk of perception of sort of overreach of the EU there? What are the challenges with that file?
So I think that it is absolutely indispensable that we have a framework, not to have one body giving the e-identity, but ensuring that we have similar standards for all the member states to establish their digital identity, and ensuring interoperability. Because we are a very large market, we are a very large economy, and we need to ensure that we can also ensure free movement of data, free movement of people. All these free movements are also real on the digital side, and digital identity will be more and more a key element here. I was very struck this year. I had the chance to visit India and to see what they have done precisely on the basis of the Aadhaar model, which is the e-identity model, which has brought to the digital world 1.3 billion persons. And this has enabled these persons to have access to financial services too, and all the services and opportunities coming from the digital economy. So e-identity is going to become more and more an issue also of social inclusion and participation in our economies, and thus the importance of having a European framework, having common standards and interoperability without, of course, hindering the existence of differences at national level or the different procedures or the different tools, but access to a wallet that would ensure that this identity can travel across our borders, I think is a key element for the digital policy of the EU going forward.
Got it there. In the time remaining, you mentioned in your lead up that there's a hot discussion now about EU subsidies, and indeed about the EU sovereignty, essentially, on technology. Are you a supporter of the move towards more subsidies and more support for EU technology, for innovation and industry within the EU? Where would you place yourself on the spectrum of free trade, we should have a level playing field, and no subsidies, to the other extreme, which would be we should really subsidize very heavily as much as we can?
And you will not be surprised. I will never be on an extreme on almost anything in life, so even less so when we're discussing these very complex issues. I think that we need to strike the right balance. A race to the top, a subsidy war, is not to the benefit of either us, of course, competition within the internal market, or vis-a-vis the other leading technological centers in the world. So I think that we need indeed to support our strategic autonomy. We need to invest and support the development of European technologies. Actually, this is what we're doing with the Next Generation EU funds, as I mentioned a moment ago. We're providing support, we're co-investing with the private sector to scale up startups, to develop R&D, to develop university capacities and human capital in this area. So we are providing the necessary support and the push at this point in time so that the private sector can really thrive in these new technologies. But this cannot lead to a competition between member states or a race to the top at global level, because at the end of the day, this is impoverishing all of us. So I think we need to strike the right balance, public-private partnership, and having a clear framework and swift procedures for the approval of legal state aid to ensure this level playing field across the EU. I think this is of the essence. And actually, this is what we've been calling for. We are front runners in the implementation of next generation EU programs in the EU. We have already received 37 billion euros of European funds because of the completion of our milestones and targets. And we are devoting 20 billion more or less to digitalization. And we have been working very closely with the European Commission to streamline all those procedures to the benefit of all those countries that come after us that have found a more streamlined and more swift process. But anyway, this is what being a front runner means. We will continue to work constructively and intensely with the European Commission, because I do think that our rules and our procedures need to be fit for purpose so that we do not lag behind, that we are up to where we should be in this technological development in terms of the comparison with other mega powers and emerging powers in the world.
Thank you for that. I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. Everybody's been listening very quietly, very sagely, but we are coming down for time. I'm going to wrap up. I heard you say the word strategic autonomy. That's a vote in favor of the concept of strategic autonomy. It hasn't been uncontroversial in this town, at least, the notion of strategic autonomy. But Spain stands behind Europe's ambition of achieving strategic autonomy.
Well, I think that the war in Ukraine, first the pandemic, when we woke up and realized we were not autonomous when it came to masks and to equipment to protect our doctors and our nurses and our health workers and frontline workers to protect us in the wake of the pandemic. And now with the war in Ukraine, we realized we also needed to be more autonomous in the area of energy and to accelerate the green transition. And likewise, when it comes to chips and to other essential inputs for the new technologies, we depend on too heavily on other parts of the world. So I do think we need to enhance our strategic autonomy, but this does not mean protectionism. This does not by no means mean that we want to close our markets. Spain is a very open economy. Europe has thrived and progressed on the basis of international trade. We need to continue to be open economies, but we need to pay more attention to this strategic autonomy in those areas that are going to be essential going forward, from agri-food to health, energy, in technology, cybersecurity, digitalization, etc.
Nadia, Calviño, I want to thank you very much for joining us here at Politico's Tech Summit, Vice President and Minister for the Economy and Digital Transformation of Spain. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks to you. Bye-bye.
So what you just heard there was a very ambitious lineup for effectively the last presidency of the EU. They want to wrap up all the big digital files. They have a far-reaching program on AI in particular, where Spain's really been in the avant-garde, and they are not going to shy away from the platform workers regulation, which is one of the most difficult files in the EU right now. I want to thank you all for listening. That was the last panel of the day. Now there are 2 round tables that will take place in the breakout rooms just down the hall over there. There'll be one on CSAM. If you know, you know. It will be in the copper room, moderated by Clotilde Goujar, just down the hall, and another one in the jade room about platforms. You can go from one discussion to another, moderated by Peter Hack. There's also a networking cocktail that's taking place right after. And of course, come back tomorrow for the rest of the Politico's Tech Summit, where we'll be talking about disinformation and global tech standards. That's it for me.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.